The ride is finally over. A season of celebration comes to a close. It's a similar sight in Buffalo. An overtime heartbreaker in round two with a controversial call in the mix for the second time in 5 months. First on the gridiron, now it's on the ice. You can only get so far playing half a season with house money. It might not have been fate this year, but it's a glimpse of what's to come. The draft is next, free agency, and training camp to follow. And I don't know about you, but for me, September can't get here soon enough. Hello, welcome. My name is Ryan Lee, and welcome to Sabres Digest. All things Buffalo Sabres will be here on Sabres Digest, latest news, updates, reactions, and more. So hit subscribe down below to follow along for the journey. And thank you so much for following along, and let's get right into it. And it's really tough trying to put into words some of the thoughts or reactions, especially when a season comes to a close, right? No matter what the circumstance might have been, if it was not making the playoffs or barely squeaking in, or what we had today, an overtime loss that also got a little bit overshadowed at points with controversial officiating. Again, kind of like 5 months ago, if you take it to the NFL season, how the Bill season ended. In overtime, the controversial call, the Brandon Cooks catch, no catch interception, and it turned into another heartbreaker for the Bills in round two, and it kind of got echoed with the Sabres. I think some of this can be exemplified and really summarized by actually a tweet that I made earlier. This was actually from my own account where I said, from going dead last in the conference on December 8th to an OT away from the conference final, the 14-year drought ended, and a lot of this was icing on the cake. And, I kind of thought in my head in the moment that making the playoffs, you could argue, was enough for this season to summarize it as a good season, a successful season in Sabres hockey, considering the abyss that seemingly all of Buffalo hockey was going through. Whether if it was the Kevin Adams era with Don Granato and Ralph Kruger and Phil Housley, and climbing out of that with what was built by Lindy, Ruff, with Jarmo Kekäläinen in the mix, it very much seems like a lot of the misfortunes that the Sabres had in that entire mid 2010s to especially the early 2020s have kind of all come into fruition slowly but surely. This team doesn't get anywhere to the lengths that it did without Jarmo Kekäläinen in the mix. Just the respect, the attitude, the no BS mentality, it allowed the Sabres to kind of turn the page into a new era. You kind of can't stuck doing the same thing over and over and again, expecting different results, because that is the literal definition of insanity. So when you have those similar results consistently not working, what do? You make a change. And for the Sabres, they were dead last in the Eastern Conference and third to last in the entire NHL. And from that point on, when Kekäläinen takes over, something just clicks in the entire Sabres organization, and they really run rampant with it. They go on what's essentially a generational run. They reignite the love and excitement and passion of hockey back into the city of Buffalo, something I have not seen since I was a middle schooler, essentially. And really bringing the conversation around Sabres hockey into a respectful place again, where they can be talked about and not just get clowned on and laughed on and so on and so forth. I think that's the part of this that really means the most in all this, is that we can legitimately talk about Buffalo being, the two-sport city that truly is. You can make the debate back and forth. Is it a football city or is it a hockey city? I grew up with it being a hockey city, but I'm sure some of the kids, especially in the late 2010s, they grew up with it being a football city. Because when I grew up, the Sabres were really good in that 05, 06, 06, 07 years, and the Bills were really bad. And some of the kids nowadays who maybe are in that 10, 11, 12 ballpark, they grew up in an era where Josh Allen was freshly drafted into the league, and the Bills were the talk of the town, and the Sabres were bad. And I saw a stat that it's the first time since the mid to late 90s. I can't think of the exact year right now off the top of my head, that the Sabres and Bills both made the playoffs in the same year. And that, I think, alone just sparks an overall new era in Western New York sports as a whole. We talked about the standings on December 8th and how the Sabres were pretty much playing with house money. And Money Puck kind of agrees with that sentiment in terms of, the Sabres probably more or less shouldn't have been in the situation they were in because of the odds just being severely stacked in their favor. The sliver for Buffalo to even make the playoffs was so small, only 8%. And you can't even see the percentage of making it to the second round or to the Eastern Conference final when we were basically an overtime away from getting there. And obviously it stinks, it hurts, but you can't discredit what this team has done because it was just so spectacular in so many ways. Obviously, no season's going to be the same. No 2 years are ever going to be the same, but this is one that Sabres fans should absolutely kind of keep in that memory bank in terms of how special it was overall. Breaking the drought, coming into KeyBank Center for the first time, the heroics of Game 1, and it's not just squeaking into the playoffs. It is going into it in dominant fashion where there were legitimate cup aspirations because they were well-deserved cup aspirations. 29th of 32 NHL teams. And going nearly 40 wins in 54 games afterward. First playoff since 2010-11. First division win since 09-10. And also, for the first time since 09-10, the first 100-point season. Those are milestones for the Sabres that, at least in the rafters of KeyBank Center, will forever be memorialized when sometime down the road they could have an Atlantic Division banner up there. It's a special season for everyone in, the black and red or the blue and gold because of what this signifies in terms of the transition for the Sabres. Tage Thompson is under contract for quite some time. Dahlin, Power, Samuelson, they have a couple of years left to go. Zach Benson, that's a guy that you lock up right out the gate, as similar to his compatriot Josh Doan, who were both lights out in the playoffs this year. Do you make a change in net? Do you stick with Luukkonen? Do you find another goalie who is serviceable at a different cap structure, perhaps? Or do you go elsewhere and find those opportunities in other guys? Especially this young core that, clearly seemed to have been hit after hit in the draft. Konsta Halanus and Noah Ostlund. Yuri Kulik hadn't played pretty much all year with blood clots, and if he comes back remotely in form, what can he be? There are still so many young prospects that are promising. You still have Radim Murtka, who was drafted early last year, too, on defense, who could come up sometime down the line. Do you maybe see if Devin Levi is still a part of the answer and work him in rotation the same way that Colton Ellis got his couple of reps in throughout the year? Perhaps. There are a lot of questions and very few answers at the moment. But when you kind of compare this drought experience to the drought experience of 2017 with the Bills, at least to me, it has two very separate feels to it. 2017, just happy to be there. Tyrod Taylor wasn't really the long-term answer at quarterback. It was the first year of the Sean McDermott regime, and it was just more of being happy to be there. Just squeaking in, final game of the year, having to backdoor your way into the playoffs because some other teams failed to qualify. And then you have a season like this one where you run the table, you have a really slow start, and you work your way up into a division title. I think the fact that there were expectations on this team because of what they did actually allows this first playoff run, this drought-ending playoff run, it kind of stings a little. But at the very least, it's not seemingly like a flash in the pan. It's not a team that just barely made their way into the playoffs, who are still kind of in limbo or still years away. This team showed they can get there pretty darn quick. In overtime away from the Eastern Conference Finals. If you put in context, the Sabres were a Final Five team in the entire NHL. That is something to hang your hat on. That is something to be happy about, worth celebrating. And of course, because ultimately the Sabres did not reach the final prize, there is work to do. You have the draft in June, and then free agency on Canada Day, July 1st. A little bit of preseason action in September, and then we're back in business first week of October. And when that time comes, there'll also be not only a higher cap to work with in free agency, but also a couple extra games in the mix once the regular season begins. At the very least, we know this team's right there. We know they're right there. Maybe not this year. But the wagon just got built. Time for some tune-ups. And we roll again in October. That'll do it for all of us here at Sabres Digest. Thank you so much for watching. For all your Sabres news, updates, reactions, and more, hit subscribe down below. Also, all of your comments. We really appreciate all of them along the way, especially all the support that we've gotten from all of you throughout the entire season, and especially throughout this entire postseason. Everyone's just been so fantastic along the way, even in debate and disagreement. It's all been so much fun to watch, and I've been so happy to be with you along for the ride. It's like, I'm going to go to bed because it's 1 in the morning, but I'm also so happy to finally shave this thing after 2.5, 3 weeks of not touching it for that entire string. And thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for being a part of the journey. And thank you to the Buffalo Sabres. I think you made a lot of people fall in love with hockey again. I never left, but I'm not everyone. Thank you for watching. Have a good one. And as always, go Sabres.